Surface creation for complex geometry. In this video, we'll use delete for solids and surfaces. We use split face, create a lofted surface, a surface patch, and use stitch. In Fusion 360, we want to get started with the supplied dataset, sandwich container. Oftentimes, when we're working on new designs, we have to use surfacing tools to get the geometry just right. In this case, we're dealing with a plastic molded sandwich container. We need to add some indent features on the bottom to add a little bit of structure and give it a way to nest into another container. In order to do this, I'm going to start by expanding my sketches and showing my split sketch. The split sketch is going to allow us to split the bottom face, and this will give us an area to work in. This bottom sketch has an offset from the edge, and it allows us to see different areas where we're going to have a recess or an indent and a transition area. In order to do this, we're going to start by going to Modify and Split Face. We're going to select the bottom face of the container, and when we go to select our splitting tool, we're going to begin by selecting the outside and saying OK. We'll need to bring that split sketch back, and we'll need to use the split tool again. This time we're going to select the inside face, and the tool is going to be this inside edge. And we'll repeat it one more time, selecting the inside face again, and this inside edge here. The reason that we need to do this is because we want to identify the areas that we want to modify the geometry. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to talk about the use of the delete tool and how it's different when we're in our solid tool set versus our surfaces. For example, if I were to select this face and simply hit delete, Fusion 360 patches the surrounding geometry for me. If I use undo, navigate to my surface tools, and I select that same face and hit delete, it's going to remove the face from our geometry, and it's going to turn this into a surface body. If we expand our bodies folder, you can now see that we have a surface body made up of 223 different faces. We're going to select and delete that other face as well. And then we're going to use our offset tool under create to offset this small face. When we make that selection, notice it's trying to grab everything because chain selection is on by default. Really, we just want a single face. We're going to bring it down a distance of 1/4 millimeter. That's very small, but oftentimes when we're dealing with molded plastic components, a small amount of geometry can add a huge amount of structural integrity. So with that new minus 0.25 offset, I can then select the original face and delete it. When we're looking at this, we now have a small offset face that's on the inside. And when we hover our cursor over these edges, because we originally split the faces up multiple times, what we now have is a division here or a vertex that we can select when we're going to create the transition between these two. The next thing that we need to do is we need to consider whether or not this geometry needs draft. If it does need draft, then we need to reduce the size of the shape. There are tools such as Extend that can be used to change the size or shape of different surfaces. If we select the edges of our surface, I'm going to grab the inside and outside edges and begin to drag them in, notice that it's not allowing me to reduce the size. However, if I drag them out, it will allow me to extend them. So because of this, it's not allowing me to create that offset. I'm going to need to use split or trim to remove additional material. So I'm going to right click and create a sketch on this. Then I want to use my offset tool. I'm going to select the entire outside profile and I'm going to offset it in a small amount, in this case minus 0.125. That small amount, I also want to make sure that I take a line and I extend it out tangent all the way to the original edge. Because I do have that vertex selection on the outside, I want to make sure that I maintain that position. This needs to happen on the other side. Once again, I'm maintaining tangency with that original edge. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to select this line and I'm going to convert it to a construction line. We'll do the same thing on the other side, making sure that that is not going to be a valid selection. We'll finish the sketch. And now we can use our tool, such as trim, to remove additional material. We're going to start with our selection being this edge, and then we need to select the area to trim and say OK. That sketch is still visible after the trim tool, so we'll rotate slightly and we'll repeat the trim. We're going to use this as our trim tool and remove that small area on the outside, and then we can hide that sketch. Now let's rotate around to a bottom view, and if we want to, we can also rotate this. Now we can see that this offset surface is slightly smaller, and this gives us a great opportunity to create a loft between those faces. I'm going to rotate this around and take a look at my Create tools. Loft will allow us to go between two selections. So first, I'm going to select this rail, but we need to keep in mind that we have these small sections on the outside. So I want to make sure that I grab all three sections for that initial profile. And then I'm going to hit plus to create a new profile selection and grab this edge. When I take a look at this, you'll notice that it is creating a new surface. We'll have to rotate around to see it because of the colors, but you'll notice that it's creating that new surface. It's connected at the top and bottom, but if we want to have a smooth transition, we can add tangency to both of those or curvature. In this case, I'm not going to add curvature simply because the faces that I'm dealing with are flat or planar on the bottom of the container in this offset. But notice that when we do have that small amount of transition, we can also affect things like the tangency weight to reduce that if we only want a very small amount of that transition. We can also go back and we can increase the offset where we were creating that transition. Instead of using 1/8 of a millimeter, we could go back and make it a larger offset. If we want to do that, we simply need to go back to Sketch 9, edit the sketch, and take a look at that dimension. So in this case, that minus 0.125, I'm going to go to minus 0.3. I'm going to finish the sketch, and then I can go back to my loft, select those tangencies, and now I can increase that back to 1 or make it even larger if I wish. I'm going to increase this to 1 as well and say OK. We're going to follow that same procedure on the other side, creating a new loft. Once again, we need to make sure that we select all three of those sections for that profile. And then for our second profile, we simply need to select that inside edge and make sure that they are tangent. Now that we have those two selections, let's go ahead and use a tool called Stitch. We're going to stitch these three sections together, and we want to combine them with the bottom of the housing. This leaves some open areas, and that's okay because we still need to fill those in. Once we combine those, we can go back and create a new loft. We're going to select this edge as well as this edge. And note, if we view this from the bottom, we bring this into focus, we can actually take the end points and drag them in so that way the loft isn't going all the way to the edges. When we do that, we also want to make sure that we are adding tangency. When we drag those edges in and we say OK, what we've actually done is we've created a division that we can select and delete, leaving just that small section. Once again, we want to stitch, selecting everything to combine it together. And now we can use another tool called Patch to fill in this open area. We're going to group all the edges together so that way tangency applies to all of them and say OK. Repeat the process by repeating the patch on the other side. All the edges are grouped and we'll add tangency and say OK. So now we've added these smooth transitions. We want to stitch those together. And then repeat the process one more time on the other side. As you can see, the process of creating this geometry does take a little bit of time. The good news is that once you create these surfaces, you can go back and you can create patterns or mirrors based on the way your original geometry was created. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to delete these edges. I'm going to stitch everything together. And then I can use my patch tool to create that surface patch in that area. Once again, it's important that we always go back and we remember that when we create this loft, we always want to be mindful of how it connects to our surrounding surfaces. If you forget to create that tangency, what's going to happen is downstream, you're going to get areas of your surfaces that are not going to be smooth. Once again, we'll make sure that everything has tangency. We'll repeat the process one more time on this side, and then we'll stitch everything together. Once we stitch the main body back together with these two surfaces, let's pay close attention to what happens in our bodies folder. Once we say OK, because we've now created a closed region, it converts it back into a solid body. This means that we can come to inspect, take a look at a section analysis. In my case, I'm going to select the YZ plane. I'm going to drag it over until we get into that geometry. Now we can take a look at how far into our container that goes, and whether or not we need to create the same sort of indent on the inside. If we want to do that, we can use our offset tool, and we can take our surfaces that we're interested in and we can offset them inward, and then repeat the same process, creating those splits and those new lofts and patches on the inside of our container. For our purposes, however, I want to go back, hide the analysis, make sure I navigate back to my solid tools, minimize my sketches folder, and I want to save this design before moving on.